Hello and welcome to Worlds Apart. If you thought the recent political changes in the world were inexplicable, try applying to them some principles of quantum physics. That's the recommendation from our guest today, who comes from a rare breed of physics professor turned head of state. How does thinking about voters as having the properties of both a particle and a wave can help in understanding the phenomena of Brexit or Donald Trump? Well, to discuss that, I'm now joined by the president of Armenia, Armեն Սարգսյան. Mr. President, it's good to talk to you. Thank you very much for your time.
Well, it's very good to talk to you as well, Sana.
Now, one of the most common words to describe quantum physics is weird. It's a weird kind of science. I think even Albert Einstein had difficulties grasping it. He described it as too spooky to be real. Is that the same for quantum politics?
First of all, may I ask you a question?
Of course.
Why your program is called The World Apart?
Because I think you can always disagree with somebody and you can always agree with somebody on many things. So what I'm trying to do in this program is to explore the things when we agree and when we disagree.
So if you want to apply some sort of a non-classical thinking even to your program, probably we will start with something saying the world is definitely going towards being apart, but it's all the same time it's going to be getting together. At the end of the day, it is going to be very difficult for you to define two things. It's simultaneously, is the world going apart or is going getting integrated or together? But that's just a metaphor. The reality is that by my first training and my first profession, I was professor of theoretical physics, mathematics, had the great chance of being educated in Armenia, Soviet Union. Armenia had one of the well-known centers of theoretical physics and astrophysics in Armenia. So I was theoretical astrophysicist thinking about the structure of universe and stars. And in mid-80s, I spent 1984, 85 working at Cambridge University, meeting and having not only professional discussions with great scientists, but also talking about the structure of the universe and asking a simple question to someone like Steve Hawking. At the end of the day, if we are theoretical physicists, what do we think? Is there God or not? Or do we need the presence of God to explain the structure?
Those are very fundamental questions. How did you narrow them down to politics, something as mundane and parochial as politics?
No, it didn't happen. I'm telling you the chronology of this, because at the end of the day, thinking about politics and thinking about God, probably thinking about God is much more complex and complicated. And I do remember my discussions with Steve Hawking. And eventually, years after, I think, I returned back to these discussions because he made a wonderful series of documentary films. But at the end, he was coming to a conclusion which I could agree with the path, but the destination, according to me, was wrong. With the same logic, you could prove that you need God. And with the same, you could prove that there is no God. So this is much more complex story than politics. But speaking about politics, it's not about politics as a craft, because at the end of the day, politics or diplomacy is a craft. And you have to learn not only at school, but with a good master. And if you're lucky, you have a good master, then you learn the craft, and some craftsmen become great artists. Making as usual.
Well, I don't know if you would agree with me, but I think the demand for that kind of diplomacy in some countries is diminishing, because many of Armenia's and Russia's partners in the West are no longer practicing this kind of diplomacy and this kind of politics. And I'm sure you would agree that Trump is the first or the prime example of a leader who doesn't care much about diplomacy.
Well, but I sort of value for the moment your quantum thinking, jumping from the path that we started discussing, and Mr. Trump or President Trump is not the only one, because at the end of the day, what I was trying to do, I was trying to be an observer of what is happening in the world today. I think we are living exciting times. And these exciting times is that somehow at the beginning of the 21st century, we have accumulated huge knowledge that we inherited from 20th century, starting from the fathers of quantum physics and those great scientists like Albert Einstein that had phenomenal, abnormal, non sort of a standard way of thinking. But for him, probably it was difficult to, not to understand, but to put the quantum behavior of particles into his own theory, which was about the large scale of the universe. Eventually, this is what we are going to get one day, which is the unified theory of gravitation, of everything. But if you observe the world today, we are seeing day after day huge examples of technological development, rapid development. People call it fourth industrial revolution. For me, it's not the fourth industrial revolution. It's sort of a revolutionary evolution. I mean, because the evolution or revolutionary evolution will happen exponentially. And our life probably will change in between 5 and 10 years dramatically. It has changed dramatically, probably starting from 60 years ago until today, when the first transistors were made and we ended up with the smartphones. So technologically, it's fourth industrial revolution, the way I want to describe this, a revolutionary evolution, where it's not only that the very high quality scientific that discoveries will start serving us, will change dramatically our lives, but also different sectors of science, technology, and life will start merging to each other.
Mr. President, my competence is nowhere near yours. I'm primarily focused on politics. So let me proceed with some of the questions that are of interest. I'm sure of interest to our viewers.
Don't worry.
Time is limitless in the universe, but not on this program. And
I'll accelerate some. Time is relative. So as I understand, your time is shorter than my time, but at the end of the day, we are seeing a huge technological change led by many things, quantum computers up to new wave of lasers, artificial intelligence, big data. But on the other side, what we are going to see here is that the human beings are not the same. They are there was a famous dramatic piece, Человек с ружьем, если вы помните, if you remember. And this was about October Revolution in Russia. But for me, the two words, the man or the human being with a gun, for the moment it's not the gun. So the moment is the connectivity with the world. So the world is becoming different because our experiences in life we're not only connected to each other, we're not only getting huge amount of information, not only that piece of small piece contains all of our lives and memories and everything, but it's becoming more and more deeper because in our activity, we are mixing now entertainment with active entertainment, interactive entertainment, and somehow, we are getting used to. Look at what's happening today. You have someone is writing or drawing a nice story. Then that story is becoming either a film series or it's becoming a film. Then after that, they are producing a game, and that game becomes interactive. So we humans like to interact, and we're using this gadget. Today, the biggest entertainment is sport, and out of the sport, the biggest entertainment is football. Okay. But people are more watching today, much more, not live sport, but the sport which is virtual sport. Why? Because just watching football is a passive entertainment. And gaming is interactive. And there's only one step from gaming, entertainment to politics. So in 21st century, politics also is going to get some elements of entertainment. I don't know, do you agree or not? Politics is also entertainment as well. And the moment it is entertainment, people would like to have interactive entertainment, which is happening today. Individuals are using their gadgets through Facebook, through Twitter and other, interacting with political events and getting excited from that because they are seeing the results of that.
Well, we are not getting much interaction between you and me for now, but I have to take a short break and we will be back in just a few moments. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Worlds Apart with the President of Armenia, Armեն Sարգsyan. Mr. President, if I may ask you for permission to ask you a few pointed questions about your theory, I would be very grateful for that. Politics has changed, but governance is still pretty much the same. You still have to pay pensions, you still have to run schools, you have to take care of the people. You cannot do that through Facebook and Twitter and
absolutely
all
not.
the connectivity.
I'm not speaking about, well, in many ways, pensions and salaries will be paid electronically through one gadget, which will be your credit card and everything together. I think from that point of view, you will come to the same gadget, which is going to be somebody's life.
But still, as a government, you have to have the capacity to do that on time.
Of course, but this is about how do you address people. I think there is a classical way of addressing every 4 or 5 years, people come together, they go for a referendum or election campaign, they elect democratically in some countries, democratically they elect a parliament or a president, and that president or the parliament rules for a while. And people give them a credit for, let's say, 4 or 5 years. Sometimes they get fed up with this credit and the credit finishes earlier, but at the end of it, that's the classical way of doing it. But in the 21st century, it's going to be permanent. I mean, the permanent sort of elections or permanent referendum, because every day a big majority of people will be reacting on this or that decision. I mean, that will define the dynamism of decision making at the end of the day. At the end of the day, presidents, prime ministers, politicians, parliamentarians are human, and they will be under constant pressure of their electorate live, speaking to them live, getting their feedback live, and making their decisions on the size of, on the type of the taxation, pension paid, and how and from which sort of resources. They'll be under pressure from the public. A sort of a public will be involved in this decision making.
Your own country went through a peaceful transition of power last year, and I think the biggest secret of any revolution is that you need to change not only the government but the local culture. And people around the world, they are much more demanding of their authorities than of themselves. For example, in Armenia, the gray sector is 30% of GDP. That's larger than in many other countries. How do you persuade your population to be as demanding of themselves as they are of their leaders?
Well, I know exact figure about, more or less exact figure about your so-called gray economies.
Well, I cited the IMF figures.
Yeah. Well, the reality is as changing people's culture. I mean, the way they think, it's much more difficult than the way they act. I mean, my assessment of what is happening in Armenia today, I feel, I mean, on the level of feeling, not the political sort of a valuation, is a lot of ordinary people, especially young people, feel freer, feel sort of confident that they can do better. And that's why the 1 or 2 words that you can hear in Armenia a lot today is, for example, startup. Everybody wants to build a startup. Of course, building a startup It's about innovation, being young, believing you are a genius. But at the end of the startup needs the culture, the startup needs infrastructure, the startup needs connection with the world. Startups, as at the end of the day, they need venture funds and so on and so forth, which are not there. Armenia doesn't have big venture funds. Armenia should be connected to the world. And in fact, the venturing today is mostly developed in big countries like United States, a bit China, a bit in Europe, a bit in Russia and elsewhere. But because the world is interconnected, because the world is becoming even closer and closer, because the ideas are real discoveries will have sort of a fundamental value. I mean, every young man will have a chance to believe that he can be the next Bill Gates or Steve Jobs.
There is a popular assumption that democratization in the former Soviet Union is only possible through a sort of EU democratizing playbook, that any country of the former Soviet Union and to some extent Eastern Europe can only democratize under the EU supervision. And I think your country is to some extent defying that assumption. Do you think you are a standalone example, and do you think it's possible for the former Soviet republics to improve themselves without Western guidance?
You know, I think having sort of a overall solution or definition for everybody, I think it's a wrong approach. Although we lived for 70 years or more, first in the Russian Empire, then in Soviet Union, and we have a lot of common things. Personally, when I travel, when I'm in Kazakhstan or I'm in Uzbekistan or I'm in St. Petersburg, I feel home. But that's me. Maybe then, and I think it's very important for the next generation of people that we are growing, both in Russia, Belarus, or Kazakhstan or Armenia. They should have the same feelings, because common culture has a great value. But on the other side, we are different. So I will not even try to have a sort of a standard solution for everybody, a stamp that will be put, okay, this is the stamp. In fact, this is not something new in my life or a belief in my life. When I was prime minister in 1996, I had a sort of a rebellion. I was a young prime minister, knew what I wanted to do, had great friends. Viktor Stepanovich Chernomyrdin was, although we had a big difference in our ages, he was a good friend of mine, and I knew a lot of politicians in the West. But I rebelled, for example, when the World Bank and IMF came to me and saying, this is the plan, this is what you have to do. I said, I'm sorry, I cannot accept that. And I went to Washington. I had a serious discussions then with Jim Wolfenson, and I made a presentation at the board of World Bank, which is not a standard thing to do. And in fact, I got the support of the Russian director at that day.
Which is not surprising.
The whole idea was that you cannot develop Armenia with a stamped program that comes, let's say, from Africa or somewhere else.
Well, and yet, just last month, your current prime minister, Nicolo Pashinyan, kind of lamented that America doesn't support or doesn't comment enough on the Armenia's democracy. Why do you think he cares about what Washington thinks?
Well, Sana, I'm not here to comment on what my prime minister has to say. First of all, Armenia now is a parliamentary republic, and the role of the president is not the role of commentator of whatever this or that politicians, including the prime minister, has.
Of course, and I'm sorry if I phrased that question in a way that made you uncomfortable.
So it's not uncomfortable.
Let me rephrase it then. I'm sure you would agree that the relationship with the United States is important for your country because it's a major source of foreign investment. There's a large Armenian diaspora there. And yet it's clear that the United States is kind of apprehensive not only of Armenia's relationship with Russia, but also Armenia's relationship with Iran. Do you think Armenia has what it takes to balance those relationships in a way that could reap only benefits without consequences? Because this administration can deliver consequences, we all know.
So I heard your evaluation, and again, I want to repeat the thing. I think in a parliamentary republic, it is the government and the prime minister and the foreign minister who are formulating the foreign policy of Armenia, not the president. So from this point of view, I would agree with you that at the end of that, Armenia indeed has to have good relations with the United States. Armenia indeed has to have good relations with the European Union. In fact, Armenia, as you know, in 1917, 23rd of November has signed an agreement with the European Union, and Armenia indeed not only has very close relations with Russia, and these relations are historic.
I want to ask you about your personal encounter with somebody, because you recently were caught on camera chatting about something with Joe Biden, the former vice president of the United States, and CNN speculated that this was about his possible presidential bid. Did he tell you anything newsworthy about that?
Well, again, if even he did, I'm not going to say it publicly. And I think I will say yes or no if I get a permission from Mr. Biden himself, because there's a simple etiquette of behavior even between politicians. So I know Joe Biden for a while, for several years. We met there, we had discussions, and I think we both felt that cameras are looking at us. And a part of our discussion was very, very sort of a low intensity, and but very friendly. So, so you are not the first. I mean, CNN wanted to find out what did he say. Of course,
we are the journalists. We are so simple-minded. I mean,
well, I think you don't have to wait long, Sana, because at the end of the day, is Mr. Biden going to run for presidency or not? It's quite obvious, and you have already the answers.
For the last 2 years, Mr. Biden has been telling audiences around the United States that too shall pass, and he was referring to Donald Trump. I'm going to invoke the notions of quantum politics once again, and do you think, based from that perspective, do you think Trump as a phenomenon is going to be over in 2 years?
No, again, I think we're changing the subject at the end of the day. I'm not going to try to give evaluation of Mr. Trump.
I'm not asking for evaluation of him, but of phenomenon that he represents.
Well, but any of us, including you, including me, if not today, but tomorrow, will become a human being with quantum sort of features in our lives, in our professional life, in our political life, and so on and so forth. There are some politicians, but in some countries that you can see them today. And Mr. Trump, I think you like talking about Mr. Trump.
Because everybody likes talking about he.
Well, I like to speak about quantum politics, and I would like to speak about the future of this world. And at the end of the day, even we politicians, we come and go. Our discussion was initially about the future of this world. I mean, will I be the president of Armenia? Will not. It will have some impact. But at the end of the day, this world is changing quite rapidly. For the moment, we are very much involved in finding out who said what and how he said about our internal relations and interaction and problems between the states, between European Union, Brexit, Russia, all things. That is very important things. But in the meantime, there are also other important things which are happening now on this planet. Let's take, for example, everybody speaks important things. Everybody speaks about how we are damaging our environment. Some countries are making an effort to reduce their carbon production from X amount to the next amount. But the reality is that issue is absolutely serious one. Why it is serious? Because if we're honest to each other, even if the world will decide tomorrow that they'll halve their military expenditures and spend all of that money on making this planet greener, it will take a lot of time. In the meantime, this planet is having a lot of problems. This is one issue. No matter how much we invest today or renewables, that path is going to be quite a long one. It will become shorter if we'll start using again, fighting our fear against nuclear and start using nuclear again. That will become shorter. But we have this prejudice, we don't like nuclear. And
well,
in fact,
we in Russia like nuclear, invest in it a lot.
I know. I like nuclear as well. Because at the end of the day, before Fukushima, the world had overcome the fear of Chernobyl, and there's the world starting in Europe and China, everywhere, everybody was starting talking about nuclear, both Chernobyl and Fukushima at the end of it as a result of human error, not the technology. So even if we introduce the nuclear into our basket, still the time will be huge. Still we will damage this planet so much that it will be very, very difficult to return it back.
I have to thank you for being so gracious with us. Thank you very much for your perspective.
Thank you very much, Oksana.
I encourage our viewers to keep this conversation going on our social media pages and hope to see you again, same place, same time, here on Worlds Apart.